He's 19, standing in someone's kitchen at a party, and a friend hands him a small rectangle of plastic and metal. It's warm from being in someone's pocket. It smells like blue raspberry, not smoke. There is no lighter, no flame, nothing to fumble with. He puts it to his mouth the way you'd put a straw to your mouth, and he breathes in, and nothing about it feels like doing something dangerous. That's the whole story of how this starts, and it's worth sitting with for a second, because it's the reason this video exists. Before we go further, this isn't a countdown. You've probably seen videos that rank the warning signs of vape addiction, 1 through 10, worst to first. This isn't that. Ranking makes it sound like a checklist you tick off, like addiction is a scorecard. It isn't. It's one thing leading to the next thing, quietly, in an order that makes total sense once you see it laid out, which is exactly why almost nobody sees it coming. So instead, we're going to follow one person, start to finish, and stop at each point along the way to explain what was actually happening to him, in his body and in his head at that exact moment. Not a rank, a chain. A quick note before we go on. He's not one real person. He's a composite built from patterns described again and again in public health research, quit-line intake data, and the accounts young vapors themselves have given researchers. And none of this is medical advice. It's an explanation of a process, not a diagnosis of you or anyone you know. Here's the promise. By the end of this, you will understand something that most people, including a lot of people who vape every day, do not actually understand. Why this particular product manages to bypass every single alarm bell that cigarettes used to trip. Cigarettes announce themselves. They smell. They stain fingers yellow. They make you cough on the first one. Every part of a cigarette is a warning label built into the object itself. A vape has almost none of that. And the gap between how dangerous something feels and how strong it actually is, that gap is where all of this lives. So, the kitchen, the party, the warm little rectangle passed hand to hand like it's nothing, because to everyone in that room, it is nothing. That's where we start. He takes one pull. It's smooth, no cough, no burn in the throat. He exhales a small cloud, and someone laughs, and that's it. That's the whole first exposure. No coughing fit, no dizziness, no obvious signal that anything happened at all. The nicotine in that device is not the same nicotine, delivered the same way, as the nicotine in a cigarette. Most vapes use something called nicotine salts, a form developed specifically to solve a problem the tobacco industry had spent decades trying to solve, which is that regular, free-base nicotine is harsh at high concentrations. And salts let you inhale that same amount, or more, without your body's own alarm system kicking in to stop you. Which means the cough that used to act as a kind of built-in speed limit on a cigarette, the thing that made you take one drag, wince, and pace yourself, just isn't there anymore. He can pull long and deep, again and again, and his throat never tells him to stop. His lungs take in more, faster, with no physical signal that anything has gone too far. The dose went up. The warning system that used to come attached to the dose did not come with it. He goes home that night having had, by volume, more nicotine than the 2 or 3 cigarettes he tried and hated as a teenager, and he feels basically fine. A little more awake, maybe. Nothing that registers as a big deal. Which is, again, the whole point. Nothing about that night felt like the start of anything. 2 weeks later, a friend at the party messages him. Turns out you can buy the same device online, no real hassle, and it comes in a case that looks more like a USB drive than anything you'd associate with smoking. He buys one, mostly as a novelty. It sits in his jacket pocket. He doesn't think about it as his yet. It's just a thing he has now. A cigarette has built-in friction. You have to go outside, you have to find a lighter, there are a finite number in the pack, and when they're gone, you either have more or you don't. Every single cigarette is a small decision with a small cost attached. Time, weather, the 20 steps to the smoking area, the fact that everyone can see and smell that you're doing it. That friction isn't a flaw in smoking. It was, without anyone designing it that way, a natural break. A vape has almost none of that friction. It's the size of a highlighter. It doesn't reek the way a cigarette does. The vapor dissipates in a way smoke doesn't, or at least in a way that feels like it does. He can pull it in a bathroom stall between classes. He can take one hit in his car at a red light. He tries it, once, in the back of a lecture hall with his hand cupped near his knee, and nobody around him even turns their head. Every single pause point that used to interrupt smoking, the walk outside, the weather, the smell that gives you away, is gone. By month 2, he's not thinking of it as smoking at all. It's more like a thing he does with his hands sometimes. He does it walking to class, he does it half watching a show, he does it standing in line at the store. Quick, discreet, nobody clocking it as anything. Here's the part almost nobody tells you, and it's the reason the story doesn't stop at occasional habit. It's the missing piece that explains why use doesn't stay occasional. A cigarette delivers a real hit of nicotine fast, and then it's over. You finish it, you put it out, and there's a clear endpoint. A small, complete satisfaction, and then a real gap in time before the next one, because you have to go find another one and go through the friction again. A vape doesn't work like that. Each pull is smaller. The nicotine curve rises and falls in a gentler, flatter wave, the same kind of signal that tells you you've had enough to eat, never quite arrives the same way. And so he pulls again 10 minutes later, not because he's decided to, but because the itch never fully went away in the first place. By month 4, this has stopped looking like a thing he does sometimes. He's pulling on this thing 40, 50, sometimes closer to 100 times a day, in 2s and 3s, all through his waking hours. And because each pull is so small and so easy, none of it registers to him as using in the way a cigarette break would. There's no ritual to notice. There's no walk outside to mark the occasion. It's just always slightly happening. Around month 5, something shifts, and this is the point where tolerance stops being an abstract word and starts being the actual shape of his day. The nicotine receptors in his brain have quietly increased in number, and the natural feel-good chemistry, the dopamine response that used to give him a small lift from a pull, has recalibrated its baseline around having nicotine present most of the time. Which means the device doesn't get him up anymore, the way it did in month 1. Now it just gets him to normal, level. Not high, just not off. And here's the part that quietly does the most damage, because it's invisible from the inside. When he goes an hour or 2 without it now, stuck in a meeting, on a flight, phone dead so he can't check where he left it, what he feels isn't really craving in the fun, urgent sense the word suggests. It's irritability. A kind of static, unfocused fog. A low threat of anxiety he can't quite locate the source of. And because nobody ever told him what nicotine withdrawal from a vape actually feels like, he's just tired. He's just stressed about work. He's just in a bad mood today. He reaches for the device and the fog lifts within a couple of minutes. And to him, that reads as, "This fixed my mood." When what actually happened is that the withdrawal simply stopped. The way scratching an itch feels good mostly because the itch was there in the first place. This is the trap inside the trap. He's not chasing a high anymore. He's just trying to feel like a normal, functioning person. And the only thing reliably doing that for him now is the exact thing that put him in this state to begin with. Around this time, his roommate starts half joking about it. "You're always hitting that thing." And he laughs it off, genuinely unbothered, because here's the other piece holding the whole structure up. Socially, this still doesn't read as smoking. It reads as a habit, a quirk, maybe even a little bit funny, the way people used to joke about someone always chewing gum. There's no yellow-fingered uncle image attached to it yet, no stained teeth, no smell on his jacket that his mother would recognize the second he walked in. Vaping arrived with an image built for it on purpose, sleek, modern, flavored, marketed early and heavily toward exactly his age group, framed for years as basically a harmless alternative, a way to quit smoking rather than a way to start something new. By month 7, the device isn't a thing he carries, it's a thing he checks for the way you check for your phone, patting his pocket without thinking, twice an hour, and feeling a small, specific unease on the 2 occasions he leaves it at home. He tells himself it's because he actually likes it, and in a narrow sense that's true, but liking it and needing it have quietly become the same sensation from the inside, and there's no clean way to tell them apart anymore. Then comes the morning that becomes the turning point, and it isn't dramatic in the way a movie would make it dramatic. He's at his cousin's wedding, seated at a long table, phone away, jacket left at the coat check with a device zipped inside a pocket he can't get to without leaving the room. 40 minutes in, he realizes he hasn't heard a single sentence of the toast that's happening 2 feet from him, because his whole attention has narrowed down to one small, insistent, wordless want. He excuses himself, walks to the coat check in the middle of someone's speech about his cousin, retrieves his jacket, takes 3 pulls standing alone in a hallway, and only then can he go back in and actually be present at his own family's wedding. Standing in that hallway is the first time the thought arrives fully formed, instead of half-formed and easy to wave off. I could not sit through one toast. That's the sentence that does it. Not a health scare, not a doctor's warning, just the plain, undeniable fact of what just happened, stated back to himself in his own head. He does the math that night, mostly out of a kind of grim curiosity. The pods aren't cheap, and he's been buying them every 4 or 5 days for months. It comes out to more than he was ever spending on the 2 or 3 cigarettes a week he used to have as a novelty at parties. A lot more once he actually adds up a year's worth of 4-packs. And it isn't really the number that lands hardest. It's realizing he has no memory of deciding to spend that much. Nobody sat him down and asked him to commit to this. It simply became the baseline, one pod at a time, the same way the whole thing became normal. One small step where nothing seemed to have changed at all. None of this is presented here as a warning about wedding etiquette. It's presented because this is genuinely how the reckoning usually arrives for people in his position. So what actually makes something like this hard to walk back once you're here? Not weakness, and this part matters more than almost anything else in this video. His brain's chemistry has genuinely recalibrated around a near constant low dose, which means the first days without it aren't just missing a habit, they're the actual withdrawal we described earlier, arriving all at once instead of being quietly topped off every 20 minutes the way it has been for a year. The fog, the irritability, the low static of anxiety, all of it shows up at full strength with nothing there to interrupt it. That's not a character flaw showing up. That's a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do when something it adapted to is suddenly withdrawn. Here's the honest, non-preachy part for anyone watching this who vapes the way he did at month 2 or 3. Occasionally, casually, definitely not addicted, definitely still in control. 2 things, and neither of them is a lecture. First, the absence of coughing, smell, and a clear stopping point isn't the absence of a real dose. It's the absence of the warning system that used to come attached to one. And that gap is worth noticing on purpose, because your body isn't going to notice it for you. Second, if you've ever caught yourself reaching for it not because you wanted to, but because you felt slightly off and it made the off feeling go away, that's worth being honest with yourself about now, while it's still a small, easy thing to look at, rather than later in a hallway during someone else's wedding toast. This isn't a countdown, and it isn't a verdict either. It's just the shape of how it actually goes, laid out in order, so that if you're somewhere in the middle of it right now, you can see exactly where you are, and exactly what happens next if nothing changes.